This friction is what we need. That should take care of it. That's the way to do it, yeah. This is the fun part. This is the mystery of all, coming up with ways to fix things you've never had to fix.
I bought it as I was in Central Time and I bought a clock. A little thing kind of like that.
And we moved from Baltimore down to the Washington area when Sean was born, just because of the schools and all that stuff and look for, and my wife's work was down that way. And we wound up in a neighborhood where across the street was a watchmaker. And basically the same age as me, and third generation watchmaker, a nice family store in DC. And they were the closest jewelry store to the White House. So they did work for presidents and stuff like that. And so it was pretty interesting. And he had a small shop set up in his house. And the kids used to play together and we hung out, and I started, that looks interesting. And I'd been knocking on doors in DC to try to get the still business back up, and it didn't feel good. It just, I'd already been working in Baltimore for 15 years at a pretty high level, and to walk in, the new guy on the street, it sucked. It wasn't very good at all. So I basically sold everything and said, and I worked with my brother for a couple of years and started with the clocks from the guy across the street. I picked one up and took it across the street. I had a shop set up over there, but a wood shop, and started going back and forth, working in his shop, trying to do clockwork and stuff. And so I apprenticed with him for basically 2 years. And it was just basic. He was a mentor. I could, if I had a question or a problem, I could go over there and he could suggest books and things like that that I could use for research. And you combine that with doing the trade work and fixing clocks one at a time, you start figuring it out. And all that. It was, we wanted to live here. Yeah. And I figured, well, it's a pretty good area, let's see what the clock stuff will do. I met the one clock guy in town when we first moved here and saw that his entire shop consisted of a toolbox about that big. And I sort of, and I had a lot of what I have now already. So I said, well, these shouldn't be too much of a problem. And we've stayed with it. But puzzle solving is, I think, the primary reason I like this, and it's,
that's what comes to mind.
With the inspection, you can generally figure out the condition of the overall piece, and sometimes what's wrong with it is apparent. And sometimes, like that beast behind me, you have to let it run and it has to stop, and you have to figure out why. And sometimes it could be a burr on one tooth, or something. I've had stuff that's come in here where I found candy wrappers inside of a clock that had jammed up a gear. And there was no reason for it to be in the case, but it belonged to a guy's elderly mother, and she did things like that.
Also, you're living in the micro world, aren't you? I mean,
pretty much. I mean, I wear a loop or a visor almost 8 hours a day. It's very similar to being a dentist, actually. You wind up cleaning things like teeth, and replacing teeth if they're broken. Yeah, the funny thing about watches is they're primarily repaired by replacing parts. Okay, and that's one of the major problems with the watch repair industry right now is the lack of material. And material is new wheels, new whatever. Anything that you can replace in a watch usually is replaced, not repaired, because of the size primarily. I mean, it's hard to make some of that stuff unless you're a machine, okay?
Right.
And those machines, when they were operational, cranked out hundreds of thousands of those parts. But that's all drying up now. Thank you, digital, everything.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stress involved in something that small, a lot of pounds per square inch. But we'll see. Most of the clock guys repair things because we're not going to get spare parts on a 300-year-old grandfather clock that maybe this one fellow made 30 or 50 of over his lifetime, so you repair things. And that's I think the key difference between a watch guy and a clock guy is as we fix them, you replace them. Some of these things like the carriage clocks and some of the regulator clocks can be very, very complicated. They do a lot of different things, okay? And then there's something like that Seth Thomas, which used to be probably in every railroad station or office building or office for the government that you could think of back in its day.
Yeah.
You know, and then when they electrified everything, I heard that they took all the ones in Washington down to the mall, threw them in a pile and burned them, which is the way our government has recycled stuff, you know, forever. Well, you know, eventually, you know, the mechanical clock's got to disappear. The materials aren't going to become available. The, you know, mainsprings and that kind of stuff are just, they're not going to manufacture them. It won't be worth it for the steel companies to do it or anybody else. But until that day, I mean, right now you can buy a brand new washing machine or a dryer, and the timer in there is spring driven. You know why? Because they work, they're simple, and they don't need to be repaired, you know, until the damn thing dies on its own anyway after 10 years or 15 years. That's the other problem with my business is basically the people that are in it are ancient at this point.
Your son kind of the exception to the rule.
Well, he's doing pretty well. It's kind of fun. It's exciting for me. I wouldn't mind putting "and Son" on that sign out front, you know, that'd be good.